All right. Uh, Good evening, everybody. How's everybody doing tonight? Woo! Okay, we got a little space to be in community with one another because last time it was packed up in here, and I was like, damn, I can't breathe. Um, so we got some space. First, I want to thank the law for this great opportunity to work with these extremely talented community of writers and mentors. It's just been really an honor. Second, I want to thank Sherry. She feeds us, that's important. Takes care of us in so many wonderful ways, so I really appreciate that. And finally, I want to thank my partner of 17 years, Anitra College, she is my audience, my muse, and the moon of my life. Game of Thrones reference. Um, so I have two pieces. I'm going to try and get through them. I don't want to take up all the time because I'm excited to hear my colleagues. But this first piece is something that I actually finished today. I was originally going to read another piece about the U of M football scandal, but I thought too soon, too fresh. So I went in a very different direction. So this piece is called The Double Consciousness of Coloredness. In the episode Being Bow-Racial in the hit TV show Blackish, Rainbow finds herself in a quandary about her race when her son, Andre Jr., brings home his first girlfriend who happens to be white. She spirals into a racial abyss. Why would Junior bring home a white woman? Isn't she, a black woman, a mirror for his love interest? And spoiler alert, she runs to her white father for confirmation of her blackness, which he, of course, gives her. He's always known she was black. Why was she confused by this? Of course, in the middle of the episode is a supposedly hilarious retrospective of Rainbow's racial identity struggle. Not black enough, not white enough, she found herself permanently on the outside looking in, performing blackness on one hand and attempting whiteness on the other. Rainbow's struggle with racial identity is at the center of most of the conversations about her children and the way she views the world. Rainbow serves as the level-headed, post-racial, privileged, logical foil to her brown-skinned husband who constantly sees racism around every corner and is nearly always hysterical in his attempt not only to prove his black authenticity, but also to maintain his talented 10 status. And he is most hysterical when it comes to his children, whom they both decided to raise in what seems like the whitest neighborhood in which they attend the whitest school. Recently, I have been surrounded by biracial young women. Primarily, they are either daughters of white women or adopted into white families. The stories they tell me about the absence of blackness in their households frightens me. They came to their coloredness through their college experience. They reflect on the trauma they suffered as children, teenagers, and even now as young women, finding their way through the racial minefield of family members eager to talk about those damn niggers, spics, and chinks, while sitting next to young biracial women who are outgrowing the ignorance of their families. The first question my bio mom asked me on the phone 7 years ago was, "Do you consider yourself black?" What else could I consider myself? It is tragic to her that I have alienated her identity from my identity. I have seen this with white women raising brown and black children, white women who are the invisible protectors and purveyors of white supremacy, who we saw in the 2016 election chose whiteness over and over, disregarding the coloredness of their children. I first heard about tragic mulattoes when I was a kid sitting in corners of rooms occupied by adults being seen and not heard, eavesdropping on their conversations about friends, family, and inevitably the children that they produced. The tragic mulatto trope being one of the neurotic, often suicidal, white-passing, self-hating Negro, created in an imagination of white writers and dreamers as a way to describe the alienation from whiteness the product of miscegenation must feel. Pop culture in both film and literature lamented the tragic mulatto, the most famous being Sarah Jane in the 1959 remake of Imitation of Life. As she falls on the casket, she cries out that she killed her mother by turning her back on her blackness. This declaration earns gasps from the white crowd, including her lover and the white woman who her mother worked for all her life, who begs her not to reveal her identity. It is indeed the saddest ending I've ever seen. Incidentally, in movies, most tragic mulattoes are portrayed by white women. In a wink to the audience, the film lets you know this is just teledrama, and the actresses are actually white and safe from this tragedy. Today's tragic mulatto is post-racial, taking or leaving blackness on a whim. They are not white passing, but they rely on colorism to succeed. They are almost always privileged, but most importantly, they are set in contrast to their darker cousins. They are the logical and level-headed ones in a world rife with racism, and they often gaslight their darker counterparts, echoing sentiments from white folks that things are just simply not that bad. In Dear White People, a movie that was partially filmed on the U of M campus, Sam White is the embodiment of the new tragic mulatto. The filmmaker combines some of the tropes of the past with new tropes. Sam is hiding a secret, her white lover, using the mulatto identity as the angry black woman who sees injustice everywhere on the fictional college campus. Her light skin allows her anger more credibility than her darker counterparts. Yet when shit really hits the fan and begins to go down, she chooses whiteness and turns her back on blackness as if it is a robe that one can choose to take off. When confronted by my bio mom's question on whether I consider myself black, I didn't know what else to say, but yes, of course, what else would I be? I don't have to tell you that this question was a gateway into her psyche around matters of race. On the heels of the 2016 election, I opened a conversation with my bio mom using a joke a biracial friend asked her white mother. So how does this work? Do I show up at a plantation or can you just buy me outright? She was curious about my fear, but pushed it aside in favor of her excitement for the new administration. She was happy that Obama had been pushed out of office as if he hadn't simply come to the end of his final term. We spent 20 minutes engaged in a back and forth which devolved into two very privileged positions. One, that if I loved her, then I should educate her. And two, that I needed to become educated about white people. To which I responded, it is not my job to educate her, and emotional blackmail is not going to endear me to the idea of expending emotional labor on a futile exercise. And two, if there is any people who know white folks, it is black people. In that moment, it was never more clear to me that I was lucky to have been adopted, that my whole life was not only steeped in blackness, but that blackness was seen as the epitome of excellence. It became very clear to me that I should be thankful her parents had the gall to be scandalized by their white daughter's foray into miscegenation, and that I was stolen from my bio dad's family and given up. W.B. Du Bois, one of our most celebrated mulattoes, wrote in his seminal book, The Souls of Black Folk, "It is a peculiar sensation, this double consciousness, this sense of always looking at oneself through the eyes of others, of measuring one's soul by the tape of a world that looks on in amused contempt and pity." My own confrontation with a white mother who centers her whiteness over my coloredness, who is challenged by my blackness, has helped me to have empathy for the young women in my life who are struggling with their coloredness. In fact, I find myself listening closely to their stories, eager to hear their coping mechanisms for loving racists while attempting to love themselves. I used to harbor contempt for biracial people who seemed eager to do anything to avoid blackness. Their argument, "Why do I have to choose?" still slices my soul. There is no choosing. It just is. And decentering blackness for color blindness is racist in thought and practice. How can one erase the skin they're living in? There was a time when I saw biracial folks grappling with their coloredness as weak. I have come to understand that truly their struggle is the literal embodiment of a double consciousness. Two-ness, an American, a Negro, two souls, two thoughts, two unreconciled strivings, two warring ideals in one dark body, whose dogged strength alone keeps it from being torn asunder. That was the scary piece. Now we're going to get to the other piece that's kind of funny. Woo, got through that one. All right. So as Sherry said, I'm primarily a fiction writer. Oh, goodness. Yeah, fiction. I love creative nonfiction because I am, as Sherry said, a pop culture junkie, and I like to make connections to pop culture with my own life. And I grew up as a latchkey kid. Anybody else? Latchkey kids? Latchkey kids in the house. So television was often my babysitter, right? And I was also a voracious reader. And so at a very young age, I had access to adulthood in a way that most kids my age did not. Okay, and this next piece is a reflection of that complicated relationship with knowledge. It's also a piece I used as a submission for the mentorship program. It's called How to Survive Like a Porn Star. How to Make Love Like a Porn Star was my favorite book for a year. Jenna Jameson's biography of her rise from the trailer park to become the wealthiest woman in porn is a relatively easy read. She has a lot of savvy and used all the bad, horrible, and destructive stuff that happened in her life to make herself into the type of woman that doesn't have to ask anyone's permission to do anything. I laughed at all the parts that were intended to be funny. I was sad through the parts that I was supposed to be sad through, and I cheered as she rose to the top of her game. I was obsessed with this book, for real. Reading her book always took me back to the time I found my father's porn stash in the basement. The thing is, with my dad, we knew he had subscriptions to Penthouse, Playboy, and Hustler. They always came in the mail in these plastic bags where you could see the woman's face but nothing else. For some reason, I didn't think he kept them. Then one day, my brothers and I were rummaging around in the basement looking for old stuff. So this was during a time when parents left their kids home alone in the summer while they worked, and we knew not to leave the front yard, and the furthest we could go was the candy store around the corner. So under musty boxes filled with clothes marked for Goodwill, broken dolls, and board games with missing pieces, we found 4 to 5 boxes marked magazines. Inside was a treasure trove of porn. He had some of the very first issues of Penthouse, Playboy, and Hustler. He had that magazine with Marilyn Monroe on the cover. We dug through them, giggling at the comics, squealing at the plastic abortion and poop gag gifts in the ad section of Hustler, and finally settled into our favorites using the single bare light to illuminate our excursion. My brothers immediately went for the extra raunchy Hustler, of course. I was drawn to the stylish Playboy, but especially Penthouse. So anyone who knows nudie magazines knows that if Playboy with its airbrushed Leibovitz and Ritz photos and fiction by Vonnegut and Cheever has always been for the upwardly mobile Playboy, Hustler with its stripped-down Polaroid exposed photos is for the average Joe with dirt under his nails working the third shift at the brewery, and Penthouse is for the middle management guy who likes a little porn with his well-written fantasies. Playboy has the prettiest pictures and great articles, but Penthouse Forum is known for its highly detailed and unbelievable debauchery. Much like I'd later do with Jameson's biography, I pored over those stories, keeping in mind my favorites, casting aside the ones that I thought were average. The stories were explicit fantasies of guys meeting their sexual equals or teachers in places like gas stations, clubs, bars, libraries. The stories were titillating and thrilling. This was also at a time when I was brushing against my conflicting sexuality and religious devotion. I was 13 the first time I heard the words sexual degenerate and hell in the same sentence. Up until then, I harbored a desire to be a minister. So I was in a confused place, experiencing sexual attraction to my female friends, believing I was going to hell because of it, while also being thrilled by the anonymous and raucous writings of men who tried to top one another in every issue. Porn had also made its way to cable television, so early cable television boxes were brown rectangles that resembled pianos without legs. Along the front were the cable channel numbers, and there was a white knob that you slid back and forth along the length of the box. I remember it well because it made a satisfying clicking sound as it landed on each channel. My parents had a full cable subscription. I think we had about 40 channels. They also subscribed to both HBO and Cinemax. Most of the cable boxes came with bronze locks attached to the cable cord. The locks allow for parents to control the images kids could see so that if you landed on a locked channel, the picture would be fuzzy or black. The summer of 1984, after finding the porn stash, my brothers and I learned how to pick locks. Back then, Cinemax, or Skinemax, had a reputation. It showed movies like Debbie Does Dallas or the Emmanuel series beginning around 8 or 9. We'd wait until we heard our dad's thunderous snoring from across the hall and unlock the box. We turned the volume down real low and pull up our pillows on the floor. This was before we had remotes to change the channel and closed captions, so trying to actually hear the dialogue was impossible. And of course, being scared that you'd get caught made the blood pumping in your ears louder than the voices on the screen. But we knew we didn't have to know what they were saying to get the gist. Sex was happening and lots of it. Of course, that was softcore porn. No money shots, pearl necklaces, or any other kinky stuff. Still, it was there on the screen. In my mind, the words from Penthouse acted out in front of me. As kids do, we giggled about what we saw. My brothers traded the old Hustler magazines with their friends for candy, G.I. Joes, Hot Wheels, and such. I secretly showed a girl I had a crush on one of the stories, and she squealed about how it was gross. I mostly hoarded the old Penthouses, being careful not to expose my habit, but I almost got caught when the Vanessa Williams issue came out. I waited for weeks for my dad to discard it around the house. When he finally forgot he hid it between the stack of ebonies and essences in the bathroom, I pilfered it, slipping it into the pillowcase on my bed. I tore through that issue. I had watched Vanessa be crowned Miss America, and I also watched the news when she stepped down. I listened to my parents and their friends discuss how Nessa shouldn't have given up because racism. Those images of her were spectacular to me. Now that I know how uncomfortable she was with herself in those images, it's a bit weird to admit that those pictures made me tell God a conversation that would last another decade that I was okay with me. It was the 80s, and I didn't have the words for lesbian. But what I have always had was an unending curiosity about the women in the stories and in the pictures, women who enter the sex industry. Nearly 90% of these women share a common story. Someone stole their innocence in the most brutal way possible, and they deduced that they were only good for one thing and therefore should make money from it. I was obsessed with Jenna's biography because in between the laughter and the winking style of writing about the business, I heard my story. Here's what I know about rape. It does things to your body and mind. Some women turn their bodies into sex machines, tight-lipped, curvy, toned, and flexible. Other women, like myself, turn their bodies into sexless mannequins, overweight, flabby, large, and hidden. This is something I only began to discover as an adult nearly 30 years after the 4 years of abuse ended. At 13, I had begun to look like a woman. My mother had called me snake hips for years. I spent most summers without a shirt on until buds started rising on my chest. Before bras, I was a tomboy. Football, baseball, soccer, swimming. I raced bikes and climbed trees, fought through rocks, and flirted with girls. Flirting with girls was what prompted the 4 years of rape that I endured every summer. Rape, mental torture, manipulation, beatings, all at the hands of someone I loved. When I was able to say no, I did, and in the absence of that, I read Penthouse Forum and slowly gained weight. I went from athletic to obese. This hiding took 30 years, but my mind was already hiding, counting the moments through chips and cookies when boys would stop looking, touching, snapping my bra, trying to talk me into sex. I knew about sex, and the sex in the forum was nothing like the sex I knew. Everyone seemed to be enjoying themselves. Jenna always seemed to be enjoying herself. In her book, she shares the darkness which led her to porn and the search for empowerment which led her to become the world's most famous porn star. Jenna is only 2 years younger than me. I think about that when I see her now, tattooed and surgically altered so that she is a plastic version of herself. She's doing to her body what I've done to mine, attempting to hide from plain view. When I stopped being obsessed with Jenna's book, I put it on my bookshelf, the spine facing out. I talked about the book with nearly everyone I knew. I might have even blogged about it. But I never watched another one of Jenna's movies. I couldn't even read the Penthouse Forum books I'd gotten as a gag gift that Christmas. I just kept thinking, why did Jenna always seem to be enjoying herself? Thank you.